Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. This is our book club episode of the week, and we are so glad you're here. My name is Megan, and my fabulous co-host is...
Hi, I'm Amanda.
Welcome. If you have ever felt like a fish out of water in the homeschool community because your math curriculum doesn't have problems in it, like 1 + 1 = Jesus, or you like to say, fuck, we're your people. Welcome. We're glad you're here. So before we jump into today's books, I wanted to share that we have been mega proactive. Can we give ourselves like a little pat on the back for being so proactive, Amanda? We have chosen our next 3 books. And I've got them here, so I thought I would share them just to get you a little bit excited about what's to come. If you're like, oh my gosh, if these two talk about transcripts one more day, there's a change of pace coming. I'm enjoying the transcript talk, but if you're not, there's a change coming. So first up, I will say I do have a copy of this book, and I don't remember, Amanda and I have a shared document, a Google sheet where we put books. I don't even remember which one of us added this book, but sometimes we'll see stuff recommended in a Facebook group or on our Amazon account, and we'll just drop it in there, right? So we picked this one, which is called Remaining You While Raising Them, The Secret Art of Confident Motherhood. And that sounded amazing.
Yeah,
so
I think we were both like, yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Sure.
I was in on that, right? So I was like just flipping through it at one point when it first came, and I saw something that said like, thank God, blah, blah, blah. But people use that culturally, right? Like, oh, thank God that didn't happen, you know? And I was like, okay. So then I went to break down the chapters and start to lay out like the next couple of months of reading episodes and whatever, book club episodes. And I found it was like on page 2 of the book. There's a lot of Jesus in this book, right? Like a lot. So I sent a picture to Amanda and she's like, that's a lot of God in one paragraph. I'm like, oh, yes, it is. So that I'm returning that to Amazon. Okay.
And listen, if that's your thing and you listen to us because you are into secular homeschooling, but
have at it.
But you are a faith-based person in general, by all means, read it. It sounded interesting and it definitely piqued my interest. But I don't church, and I don't do God or Jesus except when taking the Lord's name in vain. So it's not for us, by all means.
Yeah, I mean, I will say one of my most profound parenting books in our last episode, you talked about Differently Wired being like a game changer for you in the world of parenting. One of mine was written by Sally Clarkson, who's as Jesus as it gets, right? Like they were missionaries in Africa, for crying out loud. So that was one for me. I just we're not Jesus people, we're Jews, so clearly that's a conflict of interest. But but I just took all her Jesus stuff and I converted it into language that worked for me, right? So some people are comfortable with that, but I know there are plenty of people who probably listen to us who have religious trauma and things like that as well. And so no, we will not be reading that book for a lot of reasons. But yeah, the book does look great, so have at it. So the books that we are actually going to read, we have the Homeschooling Starter Guide, which looks really cool. And I love the cover. It's got like a very Art Deco kind of thing going on. The subtitle is How to Create and Adapt the Best Education Action Plan for Your Needs. And I'm excited about that. And the font, I'm a big person, like the cover and the fonts and the whole thing, which is ironic because it's in our book club discussion for this week about like font choice. It really does make a difference. This one feels happy on the inside. I like it. Our replacement for the Super Jesus option is the Danish Way of Raising Teens. What the happiest people in the world know about raising confident, healthy teenagers with character. And I'm excited about that one. Amanda found that as a substitution because American teens are like the most stressed out, depressed, anxious, etc., like across the board, like if you compare us to most countries. So there's something the Danes know that we don't know. So I'm excited to read that one. And then our next one, or our third one out of our upcoming selection, is Better Than College, How to Build a Successful Life Without a 4-Year Degree by Blake Bowles. And I will say, I've read this book before. I know Blake personally. My kid goes on Blake's unschooling adventure trips. He spent a month with him in Berlin last year and stuff like that. I will say, I love the book. I've read it before. I feel like the title is a bit of a misnomer because he's not particularly anti-college. He's anti the message that college is for everyone and it is the one and only path to success. So if you're sitting there being like, I think college is important, yet the book doesn't dispel that myth, right? Like the book just kind of talks about making sure that you know your direction when you're going to college, making sure that you're making wise decisions as you head into college, and acknowledging that, yes, college is not for everyone, which I think we could agree upon, right? I mean, that seems valid.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
that's it. I think we can all, like, I'm super pro college. I think, university in general, for the vast majority of people, unfortunately, the direction we're going, like, 4-year degrees will make a huge difference in many ways, in lots and lots of ways. That does not, however, change the fact that there are plenty of other ways forward, and college is not for everyone. And even if you do ultimately decide to go to college or get a 4-year degree using some of the alternative paths to a 4-year degree, there is plenty to be said for the other paths as well, whether you're going to trade school or you're getting some kind of a certification or apprenticeship or whatever. There are so many ways to put it together in life. And, if I don't know. I guess maybe if you're listening to us and you're like, the only way forward is this and there's no other, like, we're probably not your people in general, right? We're pretty big on the, like, there are lots of ways to get where you're going, and there isn't one specific way that's the be all end all. And yeah,
I think we're kind of an example of that, since I'm like a super duper unschooler and you're a super academic, aggressive homeschooler. Like, and we're both still getting there, right? Like, there's more than one way to get to the same place, which is
that's it. And we like each other and we respect each other. And so, like, if you can't get behind that, you should, like, we probably just raise your blood pressure, and I'm not entirely sure why you're still listening.
I took an alternative path to college. I got my associate's degree at community college, which I'm a huge proponent of community college. I did that, and then I moved to Miami to go to University of Miami. But I went early. I showed up a couple of months early, and I had the most incredible summer of my life, which led to the most incredible fall of my life, and the most incredible winter of my life. And school really was going to cramp all of the partying that I was doing, because I was living on South Beach. And so there was a hiatus, let's say. And then I finished. So, there was a solid couple of years that are a giant blur in the middle. And, and then I got there. So there's more than one path. It was fun.
No, I mean, that's it, right? Look, I loved school. I loved school. I would go back in a heartbeat. If someone would say, you can go to school for free, I do, I do a lot of, like, extra, the free learning stuff. But if I could go back and get more degrees for free, I would be all over that shit. I love school. I love learning. It is my jam, right? It seriously informs why we are aggressive academic homeschoolers. I did college in 3 years, and I had a double major, and, like, I was in the honors program, like, I was all in, and I worked full time. I worked over 40 hours a week with all of that going on, right? Like, that's me. I'm that person. My husband took like 5.5 years to get his undergraduate degree, because he just didn't really know what he wanted to do. And the school, like, finally called him in, and they were like, look, you have to pick a major and just
get off the pot.
And because he didn't know what he wanted to do and where he was going to go with it. And he started at a junior college, and then he transferred to a UC school. And, there are lots of ways to get there, right? And now in our world, like, I volunteer and I sit around disabled working on all kinds of little projects here and there, and he's the big money maker, right? Like, just because, like, it is what it is. Unless this podcast is going to take off and we're going to become millionaires, I don't foresee that changing, right? Disability in the United States is not a roll in the money kind of situation.
A few more buy me a coffees and we are like, it's going to be good. I laughed really hard when you said, like, this probably informed our decision to become, academic homeschoolers, because I despised school. I did it because it was a requirement, and I knew that it was kind of like a logistical box that I needed to check in life. But when I got my bachelor's degree, I first of all, I had no intention of finishing my bachelor's, right? I had my associates. I dropped out. I was a mega party girl on South Beach for quite some time. Then I got a real job because health insurance. And they had a college fair at my job one day, and there were snacks, and my best friend was going to go. And so I had zero interest, but there were snacks, and my best friend was going, and I got to get it from my desk. So I was like, I'll go, fine. And so I ended up talking to the school people I finished, I got my degree at like this super expensive private school, but it was subsidized by my company and all that stuff, right? So we went, and I said, okay, this is the associates that I have. what degree can I get where I won't have to redo anything and you'll just take my complete associates? And he handed me like a couple of options and I just picked one. So like, if that informs how we became unschoolers, I don't know what does. Like that is a very great contrast between the two of us. So
Yep.
But I got it done. I got there.
Though I will say that today's book discussion, is also a great example. Once again, right, we have all of these comments that almost align, or like there are very few things that are actually, we took the same thing away from this book. Okay, so our current book club selection is The Homeschooler's Guide to Transcripts and Portfolios. Every time we do these notes, Meagan puts her name in there, and every time I refuse to say it because I just don't know how. You do not...
Loretta Heuer. I don't know if that's it, but that's what I go with. I own it confidently, like a fake news kind of person who's like, that's fake news. Her name's Loretta Heuer.
Okay, cool.
Boom.
There we go. Yeah. All right. So you do not have to read the book to take something away from these episodes. That's part of the point of this, right? While you are welcome to read along with us, you are also certainly allowed to tune in just for the highlights while you're prepping dinner or shuttling kids around town, and take away what you want. And maybe you'll find something useful. Maybe you'll decide ultimately that you want to get the book to help you with X, Y, or Z. And maybe at the end of the day, you're like, there were a few good things, but I'm really not putting that on my TBR, right? Like, it's all good. So today we're going to be discussing chapters 6, 7, and 8, partly because 6 was pretty outdated and 7 and 8 say a lot of the same things. So let's go ahead and dive in.
Can I start off with a comment about how outdated chapter 6 is? Because I feel like even though it's not chronologically the first thing on the list, it sets the tone. So on page 19, there's a line that talks about using technology and recording videos and things like that, right? And she talks about, will the reviewer take the time to find a VCR to view your tape?
Yeah.
And then she goes on to discuss diskettes. So I did a lot of skimming in chapter 6, is what I'd like to say before we kick off our conversation. And it was really just, it was so... like, I get it, where she talks about like using technology wisely and stuff like, but it's 2000, like we were coming off of AOL and dial-up, so it's not even like truly, there's not a ton of applicable stuff, but you did find some gems in this outdated chapter, didn't you, Amanda?
Yeah, I felt like I actually took maybe a few more things from this than I did some of the other sections. So early on, well, again, let me start by saying chapter 6, it's called Using Technology in Portfolios.
Diskettes and VCRs.
Yeah, and her version of technology is quite dated. But on page 117, she gave an example where her high school teenage son created a tabloid satire based on Macbeth. And she pointed out, it allowed him to write about the play's events and characters in a variety of styles, from weather reports to horoscopes to obituaries. And I thought that was a really fun idea, especially if you did it like not true newspaper style, but like tabloid, like crazy over the top. Like, how fun is that as a way to like cover classic literature or any novel, really? I was like, oh, okay, that's a great, like, I would have never thought to do that. And I would have had an absolute blast creating something like that when I was younger. Hell, I'll still have fun with it. I might do it for the current series I'm reading. It'll be all about werewolves.
I love Macbeth too. So the fact that was the sample, that's one of my favorite tragedies. I'm just like, oh, that would be an awesome one.
I'm here for it. Yeah. So let's see. You have the next couple comments, although one is we already covered. So go ahead, take it away.
So the only thing that I really put was, she does talk about using technology in a way that is wise, right? And so even though technology has evolved tremendously since this was written, I do think there is still an element of making sure that the technology that you're using matches the material that you're trying to house it in and the audience that it's going to be received by, right? To make sure that it's not going to be offensive or too loud or to just miss the mark entirely, right? Kind of being tone deaf to the situation. And so that part I did take away, and I thought that was helpful.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the same thing I had with my next thoughts as well. So on page 122, She says, quote, while technology can collect and inventory a tremendous amount of information about learning, you still need to exercise discernment when selecting or rejecting items for your portfolio. And she was talking specifically about if you have built a website and you are listing things on there, then you can create links and you can go to different places and you can have one website that is for all the different things, right? And one might be geared towards a specific internship and one might be geared towards art school. And you can have all of these different things and it all just lives there. And it's true, you could upload tons of things, right? I mean, you can put so many links and things and send people so many places. But at the end of the day, it is still a portfolio. And so, be careful that there aren't so many links and so many things. And then kind of the next thing from that is, for me, on page 129, I mean, again, there's kind of a lot of repetition and things like that, but she starts talking about distribution issues, and it's a little removed, right, from what she's actually saying, but it's still an issue. So one thing she talked about was making sure that if you were going to upload something like on a website, remove addresses from reference letters, be careful about the letterhead, make sure you're whiting those things out if it's going to live on the internet, even if it's not supposed to be out there for the whole public, even if it is your kid's personal portfolio. If you're uploading it to the internet, make sure that you remove those kinds of things because someone can find it and you'd just feel awful if it was supposed to be fairly private and you weren't expecting some random person to unearth it, but they did, right? So just kind of thinking those things through. And then the other thing that I was like, yes, she's talking about diskettes. I haven't had a diskette in a very long time, right? But it is still important to think about the current tech, whether you're listening right now or you're listening a couple years down the road. There are lots of things like thumb drives, right? It used to be that you could put all kinds of things on thumb drives. We still often get family photos on thumb drives, right? Or those kinds of things. But most companies won't allow you to plug a thumb drive into your work computer anymore, because the concerns that it'll have something embedded on it. So that's obviously not going to work. You really need to be aware of that. But the same could be said for a lot of links. The idea of using a website is great, but you have to be aware of the fact that, some universities are going to have rules about not being able to open links. We talk about all the time, how are we going to provide free resources? How are we going to provide this? How are we going to provide that? And a lot of times it's a link and you click on the link and then you have the chance to download a file or a PDF or, but the reality is that is also, you get tons of those things from scammers, right? It's all an attempt to get you to download something that you absolutely do not want to download. So just making sure that you're thinking about that. Will they actually click the link? Is it in a format? What do they prefer to see? Maybe they want it to live on Google Drive because they trust that and they know they're not going to get into trouble with it. Or maybe they want it in some other format or, it doesn't hurt to ask and to be aware of the fact that technology is constantly changing and what works at different places and what's allowed by, corporate HR or tech services or whatever, like that varies and that's changing. And even something like virtual reality, I was thinking, I am really uncomfortable with virtual reality. It was not something I did much with. And now because of a lot of the neuro problems that I have, I can't do that. But that does not change the fact that it's becoming more and more of a thing. And I could absolutely see a scenario where a kid might want to provide something in virtual reality to really get a point across, or it could be really useful in certain college programs that you're trying to get into or things like that. But how are you going to share that, right? What's the best way? Are they going to be, just because the program that you want to get into at a college will really value this, is the admissions team in general going to have any idea what to do with that? And just thinking about the changes in technology as we go forward.
Yeah, like you were saying about like thumb drives and stuff, a lot of computers don't even have the little slot to put those in anymore, right? I need a converter for my desktop has it, but my Surface Pro, which is my on-the-go thing, I need a converter and an adapter for like everything that's going to get plugged in there. I don't have an audio jack in there. There's nothing. So yeah. And you mentioned Google Drives, and, with any luck, will be a very long living and successful podcast. But somebody's going to listen to this years down the road and be like, Google Drives.
Yeah, no, exactly. Things are going to change.
Her and her diskettes,
Yeah, no, for sure. Totally.
All right, so we're about to jump into chapter 7, which is a little bit more current, and it's like a big leap into transcripts, which we haven't really been talking about as much. We've been more on the portfolio side for the first, I would say, half of the book, looking at it. Before we do, I would just love to put out a little request that if you enjoy our content, we'd love it if you cozied up for some more of our perpetual circus act that airs twice a week, pretty much every week. You can find us by searching Homeschool Moms Unfiltered on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Spotify, iTunes, like anywhere. Put in, even I Googled us last night, Amanda. We come up in so many places.
That's crazy.
So wherever you are, and dare I say in multiple places, if you would give us a like or a review or 5 stars or whatever the kudos and the yes, I love this thing is on that platform, we would be ever so grateful if you did that thing. So thank you. Okay, so chapter 7 is titled Transcript Basics, and the first 2 sentences of the book are, or this chapter, sorry, the first 2 sentences of this chapter are: transcripts and portfolios are 2 sides of the same coin. Portfolios take your learning and present it as a collection of tangible objects. Transcripts, on the other hand, turn your learning into letters of the alphabet with a plus and a minus sign that are significant to the traditionally educated community. And so I loved kind of just starting off with like, what are we talking about here? Let's do this. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. So I guess that gives me my next one. It's kind of this next bit is kind of interesting because on page 136, we both have lots of thoughts, but not any of the same thoughts. So we're going to give it a go. All right. I really liked the quote. It says, grades appear objective because they are crisp and symbolic, but they are essentially subjective based on a teacher's opinion. And I think that's really important to remember. It's easy to forget, right? An A is an A, but it isn't. And it's based on what a teacher is looking for. And one teacher might be looking for something totally different. And it's hard to remember. But for me, one of the things I always remind myself of is my college French teacher, right? So I had to take French. I had to take a couple years of it in school, in university. And my first year, okay, I'm going to back up and I'm going to say, I love to travel and I wish that I was better at languages. I'm good at a lot of things. Languages is not one of them. Okay. I suck at languages so bad. Everywhere I go, I try to make sure that I learn a few phrases to be polite. And I really do try, but I'm really bad at languages, but I give it a good effort, right? So I was taking French in university and I did okay, right? It was always a struggle, but I studied really hard. It was one of the few things that I really had to study and work at. It probably does not help that when I was in high school and taking Spanish, we had a Spanish foreign exchange student and I did his English work and he did my Spanish work. So I passed high school Spanish because we had a really good thing going there. So in university, I had to make French happen, right? And I studied really hard and I did, reasonably well. And then I had, I don't know, maybe my 3rd semester, a new French teacher, a new French professor, I should say. It was university. I'm sure she was a professor. And it did not matter how hard I studied. It did not matter what grades I got on my tests. It didn't matter what schoolwork I turned in. I could not get above a C. And it was the first and only time in my entire academic career that I got a C. And I went to her and I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, what can I do? Like, please give me some pointers or some tips. Like, how do I raise my grade? Because on the tests, I'm getting at least B's. On the homework, I'm getting, at least B's. Like, but my class grade is a C. Like, what do I need to do? What can I provide to you to get something better than a C? And she looked at me and she said, you, my dear, are terrible at French, and you will never be any better than a C student when it comes to French.
What an inspiring teacher.
Yeah, right? Like
Found your calling, lady.
Right. And I will say the next semester, because I had a certain number of years that I had to do French and I was not done. The next semester, I went back to my original teacher who happened to be the head of the department, and my grade bounced right back up because it was about that thing of like, okay, you're trying really hard, right? And I wasn't in like a, you have to be conversational. I was in a, are you trying to learn? Are you doing the work? Are you making the effort? Not, you're not fluent enough, right? We weren't in those kinds of classes. But it's that thing, one of my teachers really valued the effort that I was putting in and the grades that I was able to get on the tests and the homework. And the other one was like, you fucking suck at French and you'll never be good at it. So you're never going to get better than a C in my class. Like, you'll pass, but just barely because I can't fail you.
I think, yeah. I when you said like you're not good at languages, I often wonder if I'm genuinely not good at languages or if it's because the first language teacher I ever had repeatedly told me that I was shit, right? Like, and it was Latin of all things, like, ugh. And it was just torturous, right? But yeah, but I totally get that because I got a you tried really hard C in biology that was a gift. So yours was the opposite. Yours was like you earned the B, but you got a C because she didn't care how hard you tried. I got a C that should have been much lower. And it was up, but you tried really hard and thankfully your degree has nothing to do with biology and I'm just going to let you go. And so I was like, okay, but I had my whole life, I had gone to a religious school, so through a religious school system and only learned biblical themed science. And then went to a public university and I had never seen a Punnett square before. I had never seen any of that stuff. And so then I ended up in a secular biology class and I was royally fucked. Like I had no idea what was going on. I knew evolution existed, like the theory of it, but I didn't know anything about it, or anything like that. So I got a you tried C and I was so happy with that C and I was grateful for it. And I just moved on with myself. Like that was the end. I was like, thank you. It's been real. I'm never coming to biology again. So
there was no calling your mom and crying on the phone that you had a C and you didn't know what to do about it. And your mom was like, oh my God, I can't believe we made it until your sophomore year of university before we had to have this conversation. It's okay. Yeah. Get over it.
No, I was like, thank God I got a C. I'm moving on. I'm never taking biology in my life ever again. And so my kids will sometimes ask me stuff and I'm like, really? I mean, like even puberty and stuff like that. Like I had to outsource all that. I knew nothing. I mean, I bought a book off of Amazon to figure out how to get pregnant when I got married because I had no idea generally I knew how to not get pregnant, which was just abstinence. That was the only message that was given,
yes.
And then I didn't know about any other ways. I kind of knew they existed, but that was it. And then I had to buy a book. Like I knew nothing about female anatomy. And I would ask my OB questions when I was pregnant and he'd be like, what the hell? Like, and I was like, and he was super religious also. And so I'd be like, you have to understand, like, I did not get any of this in school. You somehow became a doctor. So I don't understand what education you had, but no, like, I'm like, I would go to his office. I'd be the only woman there wearing pants or not covering my hair. Like his whole practice was like, and I'm like, he had to be just filled with clueless women who knew nothing about their bodies because no one ever told us anything. So
maybe they just weren't asking, right? They knew their place, right? And you didn't know your place, but you also didn't have any of the information. So it's all a little like incongruous, right?
Because I'd say like, well, what if this happens? And he'd be like, those two body parts don't even connect. Like, what are you talking about? I'm like, really? Yeah. So yeah, biology and me, we don't mix. I definitely outsource sex ed for my kids. And it was hilarious because I had kind of given them the basics, but prefaced it with like, but I really don't know what I'm talking about. And then my daughter came out of a puberty class and she's like, you know what you told me, like XYZ about periods? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, that's so not right. And I'm like, told you I didn't know what I was talking about. Like, I'm like, tell me what's the real information, So I totally get it. Oh my goodness. Well, my note on page 136 was just, there's a little call out box that says the 4 C's and your transcript should be compact, cohesive, comprehensive, and cumulative. And there's like a little blurb for each of those. And I really like it. If you give me a task list where then when I'm working on something, I can just go, I've got like a double check. I can go, is this compact? Mm-hmm. Cohesive? Mm-hmm. Comprehensive? Like I can do that. I love things like that. Like it just helps me narrow my focus and rein in any like wild ideas of throwing random things out there. So I liked the 4 C's. That was my big takeaway from that page.
Okay. So right after that, on the same page, she goes on, she says, during the transcript process, you will be looking at the past 4 to 6 years, perhaps even your entire K to 12 experience. And now we're talking about a high school transcript. And I have to say that this was the first time she really brought it up, and it super caught me off guard. And I thought, I bet Meagan's cool with this, and I'm not cool with this because as an academic homeschooler, as a pretty aggressive academic homeschooler, like the idea that your high school transcript would include things that you had learned like your entire academic career, I was like, no, like that's not right. It's supposed to be for high school. That's why it's a high school transcript, and you're turning it in with all these other people in their high school transcripts. But I will say that the more she explains it throughout the next few chapters, it did start to make more sense. Now, I'm still not 100% on board with the idea that you're including K to 12 as your Carnegie units for high school graduation.
Your kid is like gluing cotton balls and making cumulus clouds in kindergarten, and you put you put meteorology 1 credit.
Like, but that said, I will say, like we've talked before, my kiddo is super into World War I and II. And he's done a ton of reading and research on it. And it does seem kind of pointless for me to make him go back and learn those basics so that we can then do like an honors level history in high school. Like, there's no point in making him like pretend like he doesn't already have all of these facts in his head. So from that regard, I can see this, the flexibility that is needed to be able to make it work.
I feel like I'm rubbing off on you a little bit here. I'm
not saying putting it on my transcript, but I'm saying that I understand the flexibility that is needed when creating your own transcript.
Dude, I have like 7 years to work on you getting that on the transcript. Like this, I'm playing the long game. You're open to it now. Next year, you'll be like making notes about it. Like I'm here for it.
Okay.
Speaking of which, you were out of town. We need to talk about this offline. But before I forget, I'm teaching a class this fall about the ethics of historical fiction, and it's World War II based. We're going to be doing The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, which if you're homeschooling and using The Boy in the Striped Pajamas for Holocaust,
please stop.
It's awful, right? And so that's the book that we're using. And we're going to be talking about the ethics of historical fiction writers. Where is the line between creative license and just making up history or minimizing atrocities? Your kiddo might be interested. If he's interested, we'll talk. If he wants to come hang, we can. Yeah, it's going to be good. I'm excited. So my next note is on page 137. So there's a box here that says obstacles to developing your transcript. And there were a whole bunch of them here. And like some of them I just didn't agree with, like from my own perspective. I mean, I definitely encounter people or engage with people who have these feelings or have these thoughts, but they weren't my experience, right? Like one is I didn't do anything while homeschooling. Like we all know learning takes place like constantly. Yes, of course you did things, but I don't feel that way. So, but the 4 that resonated with me the most heavily were, I can't put all this down in writing. That felt overwhelming for me because I did extend beyond the 4 years of high school while working on transcripts. You'll be shocked to know. And so something that we spent like 8 years working on, I was like, how do I encapsulate that into something like that? Felt overwhelming to me. I can't put numbers and grades on my learning. I did figure out how to do that, but I had to think about it for a little bit because we had never done testing. It's totally valid. It's possible. They'll think that what I did wasn't real learning. And from an unschooling perspective, yes, I can see, because we talked about it in the last section, like, your Gettysburg travel brochures, and people are like, really? Because they don't understand sometimes the way we learn. And then the other one that I really liked was, they'll never think the things that I did for fun was real learning. The ironic thing is the things that you do for fun are oftentimes the deepest learning that you encounter. But again, that's not a very traditional view of education. So those were kind of my favorites from that box. But if you did happen to grab a copy of the book, it was a fruitful box for me. I liked it. It's on page 137. Okay, now my next thing is I'm putting like a pin in something that's on page 138. On the bottom of page 138, she talks about how homeschool credits are calculated, and she's talking about Carnegie units. I think we've talked about it in a previous section of this, but just as a refresher, typically Carnegie units are 120 hours of classroom seat time calculated at one 45-minute period per 180 school days, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and so I'm putting a pin in that because I want to come back to it later. So Carry on, but I will reference that shortly.
And noted.
Thank you.
All right. So my next comment was just on the next page on 139. And the quote says, if at all possible, work on your transcript the spring before applying to college and then finish it during the summer. And she goes on to talk about how the fall that you're actually applying for college or university is really intense. The application process, there's, a lot of essay writing, and then you're trying to do interviews and whatever else you've got to do, right? And scholarships and just all the stuff that goes into it. And so that it's, if you can get your shit together, it's really a good idea to start it in the spring, finish it up in the summer. And then she talks about how you can, just like a kid in regular public school or brick and mortar school, note the things that you're going to be doing in the coming year as in progress, right? If you know for sure that you're working on some specific things, and you can still have that on there. And it was one of those things like, it's like a no-brainer, right? It's common sense, but also I need someone else to put those kind of timelines in place for me, because this is one of those things that I could easily procrastinate on. And then I'm like, oh, fuck. This is big and really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So yeah, I just appreciated that. Yeah.
I like it. Okay, I skipped a few pages. So did you. We didn't really have a whole bunch there. Okay, 143. On the bottom right over here, she keeps talking about employers looking at stuff, and I can't freaking figure this out. Okay, listen. The job market is so hard, right? We're in this wacky position in time where companies are like, we can't get anyone to work, and people are like, I can't get people to call me back. I've applied for 900 jobs and no one calls me back. Like, there's a disconnect somewhere, right? But people are applying for jobs en masse. They're submitting resumes, they're submitting applications, they're submitting this. They cannot get phone calls back, they cannot get emails back, they cannot get interviews. They're like, it's just like shouting into a void. And this lady thinks that they're going to be like flipping through your portfolios and transcripts. Like, what world? I'm sorry, I was alive in 2000. No one has ever asked me, like, that's when I entered the world of, I was going to college, but like I was still working in college. No one's ever asked for my high school transcript. Like, the only time I've ever used my high school transcript was when I opened my homeschool in the state of North Carolina. And that was only because I couldn't find my college transcript, like my college diploma, because we had just moved to North Carolina. And I was like, and I found the high school one, the diploma itself, I submitted that. It satisfied the state requirement. What employers are looking for this stuff? Like, that just seems weird to me.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering the same thing, but at some point a little later on, she says something that makes me think that when she was writing this and the way that she did it, that she didn't graduate her kids, like, because of whatever states and the regulations they had at that time, but that they didn't technically graduate with a diploma. And so instead they were presenting transcripts and portfolios as proof that they had completed high school, even though they didn't actually just have a diploma. I think these days, like, basically anywhere you are, you can download a diploma and personalize it and customize it and call it good. I mean, obviously don't lie about it. Don't be like, yeah, we did nothing, but we're going to say you graduated, right? Like, be honest about it. But, I mean, if you've done some learning, which again, if you're listening to us, you've probably done some learning. Graduate your kids, give them a diploma,
Right.
it's allowable. In just about every state, there might be a couple of the really high regulation ones where it's a little bit more difficult, but they're in every state, high school kids can in fact graduate as homeschoolers.
I don't know what she's talking about, but yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe things have changed in the last 25 years. Who knows? So,
yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't be concerned about employers looking at your kids' stuff. That's not a thing.
Yeah. Right. I mean, yeah, totally. And to your point, I don't think I ever had to use my high school transcripts for anything except scholarship applications. Right. I know.
Getting
I do
a
know.
discount on car insurance, like,
Right. Yeah. I know things. Later on in life, I had to provide, my husband and I both had to provide college transcripts, university transcripts for visas. When we were like residence visas, when we were moving abroad. And, at one point we had to do it to prove that our kid could be a US citizen because he was born outside of the United States. But they did not want a portfolio proving what we had done. They just wanted to see that we had in fact.
But have you ever been to Gettysburg, and do you have the map?
Yep.
Wasn't part of it. Okay.
So just right after that, the next page on 144, I'm like, again, this issue of credibility, right? And I mean, good and bad, take it, leave it. She says, it is wise to include more than self-assessments and parental evaluations in your transcript. Third-party sources vouching for you, whether by grades they awarded or letters of reference, can produce a halo effect, increasing credibility of the sections of your transcript written by the family. And, it's that thing. This is kind of one of those, like, you're playing the game. And it's true. If the entire thing is all just homeschooling and there's no other grades or completed classes or feedback from anyone else, it's going to be a lot harder to convince people to take you seriously, fair or not. It is what it is, at least in 2024. So, use this to your advantage. I think the vast majority of us have put our kids in some other kind of class, a class taught by someone, whether it's something fun on OutSchool or some kind of karate or sports thing in the community, right? They're in something else where you can get feedback on your student, written feedback on your student from someone else, and you can include that, and it helps, right? It helps validate what you're saying.
Yeah. I only have one note on page 144, and it's this one little line that just says, do not make your grading system convoluted and difficult to understand. And the reason that stood out to me is because the number of posts that I see in homeschool Facebook groups, homeschool moms live to make shit complicated. Like, oh my gosh, I read stuff and I'm like, you are so overcomplicating this. And I think I have an idea of where it's coming from, which is this tremendous caring to not want to fail your child, right? And I don't mean fail them grade-wise. I mean fail them in life, right? Is like to make sure that you're doing what needs to be done and all of that kind of stuff. And part of that probably comes from the fact that we've been made to doubt ourselves as educators from society. So I get where it's coming from, but find a person. This is my advice. Find a person in your life who's your uncomplicator. I don't know if that's totally not a word, but find that person. My husband is my uncomplicator, and I will call him. I mean, I come up with the most whacked out stuff sometimes, like these scenarios of like just complete, utter destruction, terrible things that are going to happen and all this kind of stuff. And I go to him and he looks at me, and it's going to sound like he's being a horrible spouse, but he's not. Like, he looks at me with this look that's like, you're fucking crazy. And it's all I need sometimes to be like, I'm worrying about something that's really ridiculous, right? And he's like, yeah, like that's never going to happen, So he's my uncomplicator, where like, I'll have like, well, if I do this, then I could do that. And then if that happens, I could go here and then I could do that. And he's like, why don't you just do this instead? And I'm like, Oh my God, that makes so much sense. Why didn't I think of that? Like, find yourself one of those people. Stop complicating things. You will not fail your kids. You're doing an awesome job. Move on. Stop making things complicated. Okay. That's my advice.
No, I mean, it's true, right? I think you're right. We all worry, like, you just want to get it right, right? We want to do better. We want to provide more. We want to get it right. And it's easy to get kind of stuck in the like, but is this the right, did I make what happens if I made the wrong decision? So yeah, I can totally see that.
We were talking in our last episode about having like mantras that help us. I was talking about my like, there's no heart in the cooler thing. And so one of my other ones is I was talking to a mutual friend of ours who lives in Kentucky, and she was really, really nervous about transcripts. And we were having a thing. And while we were on a Zoom call, so I screen shared and I pulled up the stats for Kentucky education system. And I was like, you're telling me that you're worried that you're going to do a worse job than this. And she was like, well, that's a good point. And I'm like, so, and that's, I'm not picking on Kentucky. That could be said for pretty much all 50 states, right? Like, even the best of our education system still isn't, you're still going to do better by your kids because they're your kids and you care about them. And if you don't care about them, you wouldn't be taking the time to listen to a homeschool podcast. So we know you care about your kids. So you will not fail your kids. You've got this.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Okay, so I have the next comment. It was on page 147, and the quote says, "The formality of your transcript does not need to reflect how you approached homeschooling." And then there's a lot more words because she can be kind of wordy about things. But she wraps up with, "Think of your learning as fluid and the 5 prototypes as containers that can hold it. The containers don't change your learning. They simply give it a form." And I thought that was a pretty good analogy. I think a lot of people worry you're homeschooling and it doesn't look exactly like a brick and mortar school, right? It doesn't, even the classes that you do online are not necessarily going to line up exactly with what you see in a public school. Even if some of them do, they're not all going to. And so this idea that whatever your learning looks like, you can put it in a container that helps shape it and give it form that other people will understand, but it doesn't actually change what you learned or how you learned it. And this is, again, just kind of one of those playing the game and the way that it needs to be. And that's okay, right? We've talked about that before. There are times that you have to play the game. You have to do something in a certain way to get ahead or to make it work. And there are times that you get to be like, no, we get to do it our own way. And understanding that and knowing that and not fighting against it too hard is one of those, don't make it more complicated than it needs to be.
So at the end of this book, there's a whole section of appendices, and that's our last segment of, like, our last episode will just be on the appendices. There's that many of them. So for me, my note on 150 says, none of this is helpful to me without the visual. And I think the visual is in the appendice, but she doesn't tell me what page specifically relates to this conversation. And my visual brain needed that. But you managed to make some sense out of this. So what do you have, Amanda?
Yeah, well, I will admit that I was looking in the appendice. I went and read through the entire, this is about appendices B, and I read all of B while I was doing this section. So I do think that in a few weeks when we actually go talk about it, it'll be good. It'll be a good conversation. For me, the one thing that I pulled out on page 150 is she has a little call out box about resume transcripts. And I was like, I'm having a hard time getting behind this idea of a resume transcript. But she did point out that it could be useful for alumni interviewers. So depending on what college you're looking at and whether or not you can travel, you may get set up to do an interview with an alumni. And in that case, they are likely, not always, but likely to be a successful businessman or businesswoman. And so they are more familiar with looking at resumes. And so it might be useful to give them a resume transcript on top of whatever else they have.
That goes back to that know your audience thing. So yeah, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, that's it. I would have never thought of that. I definitely didn't do that. I had quite a few different interviews way back in the day when I was doing all of the college and scholarship stuff. And I definitely didn't provide that, but I can see how that could have been useful. Yeah. And then...
Oh, sorry.
No,
I was going to say, our next note looks similar, but I just read that section and my head tilted like a dog that's heard a high-pitched noise. And I was like, eh. But you seem to have put a lot more context into it. So I'm going to let you take that one.
All right. So the next page is 151. And she starts this paragraph with the quote, even though the student should be the author. And I call bullshit. Like,
that's where my head tilted like a dog. I was like, eh?
Yeah, like, why should your kid be the author of their transcript? Like, first of all, in a brick and mortar school, kids do not have to create their own transcripts. So why should homeschool kids have to do it? Like, this whole idea that they have to own their education in that way and take on that stressful thing, like, no. But also, second of all, you're the parent. You decided to homeschool your kid for a wide variety of reasons, and we generally support all of those reasons. But that also includes this headache of transcripts. That is your headache. Like, it sucks. Sorry. You know, like, it sucks. Sorry. It's your job. I will say that in the next chapter, she goes on and talks about creating it together and talking about it together and how you put things on and how it gets used and being involved in the process. And I do think that that's important. I think there's a lot to be said for making sure that you're not writing the transcript completely in a vacuum. And she makes the point that, like, what you teach isn't necessarily what your child learned or what you set out to make the curriculum about for this or that isn't what your child found interesting and what they deep dived on. And so, I mean, I do think that there's a lot to be said there for, like, take a step back and remember that you're creating a transcript about what your child actually learned, not what you intended to teach them.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, it goes back to what we talked about a little while ago. I forget what the exact thing was, but we were talking about, like, when it's super high stakes, they can be involved, obviously, but you're still, they're still kids to an extent. I mean, they're young adults, but they're like, when it comes to the really, like, make or break stuff, it should not be your kids just, like, flying solo with, like, a, you got this, honey, from the background. Like,
Yeah.
That's not how that works. Sorry.
Right.
You know, and I literally walk into my house and on my front wall, there's a thing that says caution, free range children. Like, I'm as free range as it gets. I'm like, pack your bags, go to Turkey. You'll have a great time with my 16-year-olds. Like, I'm all about that. I'm writing the transcript, right? Like, that's just not, so it's not even like I'm a helicopter parent perspective. Like, and I'm not saying you are, Amanda, like, but no, right? Like, yeah, no, we need to be involved.
Well, yeah. And I mean, it's just completely unfair to expect it, right? Like,
yeah,
especially, and we had talked about it before, right? But especially in this day and age when parents are so involved, or paid mentors, paid consultants, I mean, like, there are so many adults involved in getting kids into college and university. Like, do not be the asshole who is like, we don't do school that way, so you're going to do it all on your own, and then be shocked when they don't get into their schools that they want to be in, or
school, exactly.
Yeah, like, come on.
Yeah, I'm not saying pull a Lori Loughlin and put your kid on the rowing team, but, like, be involved, right? Like, hello. All right. Well, we are at 53 minutes. So I think we have to push chapter 8, I think, because we're going to end up at easily like an hour and 20, I think.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot for chapter 8.
There's a lot. So you want me to do a little, or you've got the call to action. So do you want to do the segue and then the call to action, and then I'll do the closing?
Sure.
Okay. So you could just explain, like, we find ourselves in this position once again,
Yeah.
Rather than rush through something as important as transcripts.
All right. Okay, so that wraps up chapter 7. And we once again find that we were a tad bit verbose. So instead of trying to rush through chapter 8, we're going to go ahead and push it off until next week to make sure that we actually really talk about it, because we're finally getting into the meat, right? Chapter 8 is creating your transcript. We both have a lot of notes and ideas and comments on this, so we want to make sure that we're actually giving it its due. So we're going to go ahead and push that out until next week. Sorry to, again, be changing this up a little bit.
Listen, that's homeschooling. We go with the flow.
It is. Okay. You have to be flexible to be a homeschooler. Yeah, for sure. All right.
I like it.
So before we wrap up our conversation today, we want to give a quick shout out to our premier sponsor, Hub of Curiosity. They offer approximately 200 classes on OutSchool and have an incredible lineup for the fall semester. We talked earlier this week about some of their different neurodivergency focused classes, but many, I would venture to say almost all of their classes are neurodivergent affirming. And so if you are specifically looking for a class that, or a group of teachers that you know are going to be better when it comes to that, this is a great place to look. But more generally, if your kids are into fantasy books or Legos or cake decorating, marine biology, and you name it, they have the perfect class where they can learn and make friends who share similar interests, that's what we're all looking for, right? That's one of those things, the holy grail of homeschooling, a class where they actually make a friend.
Even as an adult, right? I want people who get me.
Yeah. That's so true.
Right? It's just
all right, so you can find the link of their course catalog in the episode blurb below, wherever you're listening to this. And we also are able to offer our listeners $15 off of your Hub of Curiosity class. So your first Hub of Curiosity class, you can use code OFCURE115. So that's capital OFCUR 115. And that'll get you $15 off your first Hub of Curiosity class, whichever one you choose to take. So definitely go check it out. I love a discount.
Excellent. Oh, who doesn't, right? Well, especially right now when I'm paying like $10 for a thing of body wash at the store. I'm like, and with the kids, I'm like, what are you eating it? Like, it's $10 a bottle now. It's just gotten so bananas for like soft soap. It's just insane. Well, that wraps us up for today. Our plan was to talk about chapters 9 and 10 next week, but now we haven't finished chapter 8. So will it be 8, 9, 10? Will it be 8, 9? Who knows? We don't, and we're in charge. So just, stick around. We'll figure it out. We'll get there eventually. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us today, and tune in next week for a continuation of the discussion, whatever that might look like. And in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Have a great one.